Hey everyone, it is Mr. Jennings here, and today we're going to continue our genetic engineering and biotech studies by looking at cloning. Now, cloning was definitely a more hot topic when I was a kid. I remember being in third or fourth grade, and I remember going to the library. I mean, it was probably less third grade if I recall. I was going into the library, and our library had this magazine rack. And it's usually full of stuff that kids would be interested in addition to Time magazine. So it'd be Nintendo Powers, maybe Nickelodeon magazine because it was elementary school, a Game Informer maybe. But then there would be something like Time. And I remember seeing several magazines like Time and various other periodicals. I remember Time being the big one that said this thing about this sheep called Dolly. And I remember seeing a bunch of news segments about Dolly the sheep and how it's very interesting. It was a very hot topic, very controversial topic. And that's because, if you don't know what I want to talk about, is Dolly the sheep was known to be the first large mammal to be cloned. Now, we're talking large mammal, we're not talking mice. They were cloning mice for a while there. Then they started cloning a sheep. It was considered a major feat for the time, and is a very interesting leap. Because all of a sudden it became a question not so much of if they could clone humans, more of when and should they clone humans. And that's really the concern and ethical concerns that started coming about. And that's one of the things we're going to kind of talk about today, but mainly we're going to focus on the procedural aspect. We're not going to so much focus on the ethics. We're going to talk about the ethics, don't get me wrong. We cannot talk about cloning without talking about the ethics, but I want to talk to you about the procedure. Cloning in itself is, by the way, one of the more ancient techniques that we will discuss. Hold on, I don't know. Do a quick pause. Sorry, I'm doing some changes there. So the reason why we consider cloning one of the more ancient techniques, it's actually one of the kind of cloning is one of the ways you can make agriculture work. So in the last video, if you haven't watched it, it was about selective breeding. One of the things you do was you would take the seeds from your best crop and plant them. The problem is that doesn't always work. So, for instance, if you take a seed from an apple you eat, like a Honeycrisp apple, and you plant it in the ground, and say in a couple of years when you finally get apples growing off of it, you'll realize those apples are not Honeycrisp apples. They actually may be the tiny little green apples that are just not fit for eating. That's because many things like apples and various fruits and vegetables, when you grow from seed, you're not necessarily guaranteed the seed. Now, you can go to very high-end high-end agricultural places. You could order specific genetically modified seeds. Seeds have been guaranteed to have a certain trait, and those are very expensive. Like, for instance, when I order something in the lab catalog to get certain fast plant seeds, which are wild mustard, I will sometimes have to pay $20 for 200 seeds of a certain species or certain variant, when I could pay only $5 to get 400 seeds of a generic variant, because it's not guaranteed to be a certain trait. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. So what they do is they clone, and one of the simpler ways is you can clone physically. So you take a potato, you can cut it up in little pieces and throw it in the dirt. And if you planted it correctly, potatoes will give rise to new potato plants that are identical to the potato that you cut up, which is great if you're trying to grow a lot of potatoes. It's bad if you have a blight, like a fungus, move into your country and all your potatoes are identical, and that's not good. Hence the Burbank potato. That's the potato that fought the famine. Now, that's old school. Another way you can do it, by the way, is you can cut off a stem of a plant, and you could graft an actual existing stem of a desired plant onto whatever generic plant. When you graft it, mainly trees, the tree basically acts like a donor, you putting a new organ into another organism. And so in doing so, could you put a tree branch of a different fruit on a tree that is compatible, that one tree branch is going to grow the same fruit of the old tree, while the original tree is still growing whatever fruit. I've seen this done. It's really weird. It's old school cloning. But we're going to talk about cloning on a genetic level today. I just want to talk about those other agricultural and probably realistic ones that you may have seen. But today we're going to talk about cloning using DNA. And this here is what. Let's make sure we understand what a clone is. A clone is any organism that's genetically identical to the organism which it was produced from. It is considered asexual reproduction. Now we have twins here. Twins are a product of sexual reproduction, but they function as clones if they're identical twins because they have identical DNA. So we have cloned numerous organisms. We've cloned Dolly the sheep, a cat named Beaker, a frog, salamanders, and a mouse. Clone mice all the time. That's actually one of the ways we harvest them these days. So what they do, this is how they got Dolly. They take a donor cell from a sheep's udder, then they take the nucleus out of the cell with a very, very tiny needle and a very well steady hand, and then they take an egg cell from another mother, another female sheep. They take the nucleus out of the egg cell, and then they fuse the nucleus from the donor, from the sheep's udder, with the egg cell without the nucleus, the denucleated egg cell, using electrical shocks, and they produce a fused cell. Now the fused cell is also going to get the signals that, hey, we have been fertilized because you're taking a regular somatic nucleus, a body cell nucleus, which has all the normal chromosome count, and putting it into an egg cell. So when the egg cell does DNA checks, it's no longer a haploid, it's a diploid. It doesn't have half the DNA like normal here. It's got double DNA. That means we've had to have been fertilized. And then the cell's going to begin dividing normally, going through various mitosis, and then the embryo is going to be, you get an embryo in vitro. So you get this in vitro embryo, and that means in a test tube, and on a petri dish usually. And they put this embryo that they grow on a petri dish and plant it into the uterus of the foster mother. That's right, a third sheep has now entered the equation. And we put the embryo into this foster mother, and then the embryo is developed normally into a lamb, and that lamb was Dolly. That clone, the question is, who is it a clone of? Is it the donor cell, the donor egg cell, or the foster? Now, just kind of recaps here, just to remember. All right, the color is what we're going to look at. So, the nucleus of the mother cell from the desired organism is removed. The egg cell from adult female is removed, and then two are combined with electric shock. The dividing embryo is placed into a surrogate mother, and the pregnancy begins, and you end up in the result of a birth of a clone. We'll come back to this. Now, there's reasons why you clone an organism. You maybe want to revive an endangered or extinct species. You want to reproduce a deceased pet. There's actually an industry trying to develop around that. You may want to clone livestock so you don't have to harvest many organisms. Why buy new animals if you could just clone them? We use it a lot for drug production. We'll talk about that. And you can also talk about cloning in medicine. So we can clone animal models for disease. And we can even clone to make a thing called a stem cell. Now there's reasons to clone, not to clone. First off, cloning success rates are terrible. They're quite low. Because there's a lot to go on there. There's a lot of moving pieces. You're taking this enucleated cloning method. You take a nucleus from one cell, put it into another denucleated egg cell, then put that now hybrid cell into another host. You're going to take 3 animals to do it. It's not very efficient. It brings up all sorts of ethical and moral issues, especially when cloning humans. This is one I remember seeing in the newspaper. 2001. So February 10, 2001. So that's like 5th grade. I remember seeing this one. Human cloning is closer to the thing. There's a lot of issues. The ethical issues is, are they considered human or are they considered property? There's been a whole myriad of science fiction written about this. Legal issues. How should cloning technology be regulated? The United States, by the way, outlaws the cloning of humans. other countries, not so much. A societal impact. The impact of cloning technology is society as a whole. Who gets to pick the cloning? Cloning is a very expensive process. That means it's largely going to be probably saved for the highest ultra wealthy. The 1% of 1% of a population. That means are they going to get guaranteed a mortality, or then you bring up again a lot of scientific ethical concerns. So again, just to bring back to the summary here, you take the sheep from sheep A, sheep B, you combine them and put them in sheep C, and again the question is, who is the clone? So is it going to be, is the baby going to be the body cell, the egg cell, or the surrogate? Turns out the body cell is going to be the clone offspring because that's where the nucleus comes from. So all the DNA is going to be the basis for that organism. Now, what that means for, since this nucleus is now the offspring here, that means you're going whatever the body cell you put in there, it's going to get you your clone. Again, the process is very expensive. The process is a very low success rate. And there's all sorts of legal and ethical and moral concerns that we have to consider when it comes to cloning. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, scientists have yet to clone a human. I remember at the time when Dolly came out, there was a lot of people claiming that they cloned a human. None of those were ever verified. And that's because technology to clone humans has not really been explored. Most countries, as soon as Dolly was cloned, if not before that, outlawed cloning of humans because it really brings up a really strong moral ethical concern. So there really has never been explored. Also, there's concerns that human reproduction could be different from that of other mammals. Probably not, but possibility. We're not sure because, again, the technology has not been explored. There's many ethical problems involved in cloning. That is very true. Cloning is a very ethical issue. A lot of issues about ownership, a lot of issues about individual rights, and not even getting into the other philosophical issues. Also, cloning humans take too long. See, here's the thing about this pharma cloning with Dolly. When you take you're taking the body cell and the egg cell from a sheep ovary and fusing them together, you have to let that embryo develop. And that means they got to go to full term of labor, and go through labor. They got to go through full, childhood, adolescence, into, adulthood. And that takes a long time for humans. Humans, you're looking at like 18 years for this to happen. Is that truly effective? Not really. So a lot of science fiction, usually when you see cloning involved, you usually see something along the lines of cloning in an accelerated growth tank or something. So the diagram below represents the process used in 1996 to clone the first mammal, a sheep named Dolly. Now this wasn't really known until 1999. Gametes from sheep A and B were united to form Dolly. Nope. The reason why this is not true is because that is regular sexual reproduction. That's not the case here. Chromosome makeup of Dolly is identical to that of sheep A. Okay. Both Dolly and sheep C have identical DNA. Nope, sheep C is just a surrogate. It's holding the embryo. No DNA is exchanging. 4, the option says Dolly contains genes from B and C. No. Okay, the B one's a little loaded because of mitochondrial DNA, but does not contain sheep C at all. So the only correct answer is 2 here. Now, modern technology could be used to clone pets and dogs, pets like cats and dogs. These cloned animals could resume their original pets because, one, the genes of the new animals. Oh, big choice there. Is it because the genes of the new animals are different from those of the original pets? No, they're identical DNA. Have the genetic information of the new animals is the same as the original? Yes, but more than half. The new animal will have mutations not found in the original? Probably not. The new animal has the same genetic information as the original pets. That is true. Now, one thing that should be noted is there's a lot of environmental factors on DNA and gene expression, so that's not always going to be expressed the same, but they'll have the same DNA. Again, just as the last recap here, you take a nucleus donor, an egg cell donor, you pull away that nucleus, You pull the nucleus out of this one cell, take the nucleus out of the other, fuse them together using a little bit of electricity, put them in a surrogate, boom. You got a mouse cup that is the clone of the nucleus donor. Pretty straightforward. So, cloning. This is a technique that has essentially been around since agriculture has begun. Ever since people realized, hey, I can cross, literally graft plants on top of each other or cut them up and grow them in the same dirt, to, well, use DNA and like move nuclei around. There are some serious ethical concerns when it comes to cloning. Given when it came to Dolly, there was a real reckoning, like real moral concern about that. Like, I wish I could put that out, and I wish I was really old enough to really remember a lot of it. But I remember it was a major discussion. Like, I remember a lot of my childhood, but that one really sticks out, and how that was perceived. And it just, I don't know, it's different. But cloning is one of those things that's been around forever, especially the science of cloning. I mean, for instance, again, a lot of science fiction goes into the topics of cloning, and even gets into the ethical concerns of cloning. There's been numerous sci-fi movies and books about this. Because it's really right field for, concerns and real gray areas of things. Alright, but that's it for today on cloning. Now, cloning is one of those interesting fields. Again, well worth looking at. There's all sorts of cool stuff out there. But let's move on to, we're going to move on to the next video here in a little bit for filming purposes. But that's it. Next time you see me, you're going to hopefully be watching the video on gene altering. And hope you're all taking care. See you all. Adios.